see you again on this beautiful day. And this time with a quote by David Whyte, a poet. And he said, "You must learn one thing. The world was made to be free in." So please share the ideas this quote of the poem triggers in your mind, in your thoughts.
It was great to be back, my friend. This is good ground for us to cover. Then David Whyte is a poet who I've been getting more and more into this year. He has this way of communicating such richness and depth with very straightforward language. And this quote itself is something that speaks, I think, deeply to both of us about maybe one of the highest values or the highest ends that we could pursue in this life. And freedom is something that is, unfortunately, also one of the hardest things that we can pursue in this life. And freedom being the external freedom of the ability to use our time and our energy to our highest values and our highest purpose. That is also an internal thing, which is a matter of not being dragged around and throttled around by the habits and thoughts and conditioning within our own mind. And it's a total uphill battle trying to find freedom in this world, because all of the systems of the world and nested systems, so small systems that we are born into, little community systems, our schools, our states, our countries, these are really, when you look at them, they're a bunch of nested evolutionary games. And these evolutionary games are ones that are played not on the basis of survival and reproduction, but rather on the basis of survival and accumulation of power. And so if there's all of these nested games and people are over millennia trying to increase their power, and the ones that are optimizing more for increasing their power are likely to overcome the ones that are kind of meeting in the middle and wanting to optimize somewhat for power, but also wanting to prioritize giving people freedom. The ones that just raw, absolute priority of power at any expense, they generally win these games. And these are true for not just individuals playing these games, but organizations, institutions, etc. And so where does that leave us? After all of these things are shaking out, they play out, they evolve, they flow, and most equilibria that we find ourselves in the world are ones where people are, in one way or another, keeping humans within fences, keeping humans within boxes, keeping humans within buildings, preventing us from doing certain things, and what's more, even outside of these institutions, these power games, these governments, etc., we do have to eat. We do have to put a roof over our heads. And so there's some just raw necessity that is inherent to our biology and our condition, being born exposed, fleshy apes out in this world, that we have to do a lot of stuff to survive. And for most of us, that takes the form, especially at the beginning, of trading our time for money, of being forced to be in a certain place at a certain time every day, being told what we can and cannot say, what we must wear, how we must behave, and what we must be doing with our time, our attention, and our energy. Freedom is not the default by any means. Freedom is the opposite of a default. And it's hard to actually change that status quo. It's something that we typically cannot do quickly. It's something that we almost never can do effortlessly. It's something that is rarely given to us, but yet it is one of the highest ends in and of itself, one of the greatest objects that we could possibly orient our attention and our energy and our striving toward in this life. And so this is the context that I view freedom, especially external freedom. And then to briefly touch on the internal part, this is much less structured and physical, but no less real and no less impactful, and perhaps much more impactful for many of us as it relates to our real first-person experience. And that is the fact that from the age of 0, we are constantly conditioned by our culture, by our peers, by our families, by our countries, by all of these things around us to think and act in certain ways, to adopt certain patterns, to talk to ourselves in our heads, to rehearse the future and the past, and to want and not want. and all of these things, we pick them up so naturally that even if we see through these things and we understand some of the pros and cons or some situations that they might be useful and not useful, it's almost impossible for us to unlearn and untrain some of these patterns because they become so ingrained, so automatic, and so subtle to us because they are so ever present. And so from this starting point, when we see this great far prize or treasure on the horizon of this possibility of finding, obtaining, or even glimpsing and touching freedom internally or externally in this world, in this brief human life. And this is in my view, one of the great life projects that are presented to us as opportunities, and probably or possibly one of the hardest. How do you think about freedom, where we start, and how we might orient ourselves toward this high goal?
Well, you covered a lot of topics which are related to that. That's the evolutionary one. We grown up as a human species in an altruistic environment, and the people who were helping each other out were more likely to survive, but they required also a structure, a hierarchy that was connected to external status and people providing for each other services that they couldn't provide for themselves. And if you were thrown out of the group, you were not likely to survive. You covered that has a lot to do with power. That the nation state has had the monopoly of power on that and can take away your freedom if you don't behave the way the rules are laid out in this system. That we are in all these kinds of systems in the world, and that's historically speaking in the medieval ages in Europe, for example. We had a lot of serfdom. We were just like slaves. The peasants had to grow the wheat for the kings, for the knights, for the owners of the lands, for the landlords. And then they had to basically live in a small hut with their whole family and had to struggle through it. But then it developed further, and we got rid of some of the kings, of some of the knights, and then the nation state developed with more freedom for the people, democracies, even more freedom. People could now decide and vote for their own rulers who make the game, who make the rules of the game. And then now, in this age of technology, I think the possibilities are there for a next jump, to have even less state being ruled upon you, being less state which throws rules at you which may not be sensible or good for you. So in that regard, we have a shifting environment, a dynamic environment which leads the people who live in this world to more and more freedom. In that regard, that less and less external pressures on their freedom will keep them. And now we are both on our way traveling right now. That degree of freedom, not even kings could enjoy this level of freedom back then. They could not just like that fly in one day to the other side of the earth or down to another part of the continent. That is just amazing how civilization provides us with technology and tools to increase the level of freedom we have right now. And that world we live in was made to be free. And it's a beautiful framing of this kind of dynamic, of this kind of development. And not to forget, this is the external view. And now we look at the internal view. Are we really free if we are conditioned by society to do things, like you said, to do a 9 to 5, just to feed the machine of industrialization, just to raise our productivity, to provide wealth to society, are we really free if you just follow that program? If you just don't think about it? And you already know, awareness is the key about that. Awareness about what is actually what I want, or what is that what I don't want, and am I free to not do the things that I don't want to do? So looking at this from the negative perspective, in terms of, are you really free? Not in terms of to do what you want, to put harm on somebody is not really being free, but to refrain from doing what you not want to do, what you don't want to do. This could be like a more robust version of the freedom. What do you think about that?
I think
Robustness.
it's a great point, and it really does resonate in my own life. Like I can recognize right now that there are certain things that even if walk much further on this path of freedom, that I will never be able to do. I will never be able to, for instance, walk into Pyongyang and give Kim Jong Un a wedgie, or I can never walk and let's see, get a pet elephant in Nepal or something like this. There's a million things that if I was lucid dreaming, I might be tempted to do, but in real life you cannot. However, to your point, it is within my power to not have my life dictated by other people. It is within my power to allocate my attention to what it's best allocated to, that's most aligned with my values. Not that I live like this perfectly all the time, absolutely not, far from it. But this not having your life dictated for you, not being shepherded around like we're cattle and kept within a fence and told to walk from here to here to here on certain times. This is obtainable, although surprisingly difficult to get to this stage within a human life. And one point about freedom I think is so important to acknowledge when talking about this and talking about the normative benefit of this state or this characteristic is that it absolutely is not a failure to not be in freedom right now, because it is a long journey for almost all of us, and we start off way at the opposite of freedom. And so this is not saying that anybody who's currently working a job and being told where to go, when, and what to wear, and what to say and not to say, it's not a failure to do that. However, it's important to recognize that the point of playing these games in the world, the point of going and playing the entrepreneurship game, the point of going playing the high status career game or whatever, is to eventually be free of the game. And I think of this show, which is quite obviously controversial in the country that I am in right now, Colombia, is a show of Narcos, where you watch these drug lord kingpins create these giant organizations, these giant cartels, and amass just this insane sum of wealth at great personal risk and through pretty insane stunts and full sins. And as the show goes on, and you see these empires grow and grow and grow, you see they have just absolute warehouses full of cash, and yet they're trying to go for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. Meanwhile, they're getting attacked from the government and they win this fight. And then instead of saying, oh, wow, that was close, let me actually leave the game and fly to Argentina and get a giant villa where I can live in prosperity for the rest of my life, they say, no, okay, I want to start another war so I can take over this region so that I can grow my cartel by 50%. And watching the screen, it's so obvious to say that, what are you talking about? Your wife almost just got killed there, as did you. This is the most fragile empire I've ever seen, and you're doubling down on this game. You just took a 50-50 shot at living or dying, and now you're diving right into a 50-50 shot at living or dying in exchange for doubling something that has complete diminishing returns to you. You have more than you ever need already. You can only win by leaving the game. And just like watching this, it's so obvious and so clear when they're getting shot at with machine guns and they're escaping in helicopters. But this also applies to so much of our own life in terms of our economic paths. The point of winning the game of entrepreneurship is not so that you can go and build a company that's twice as big or 10 times as big or 100 times as big. It is actually to leave the game, The point of being very successful in your career is to amass enough resources that you no longer have to trade your time for money anymore, because you have very, very finite time and you will never get it back. Time is more valuable than money. Money is something that you accumulate so that you can regain ownership of your time, of your energy, of your attention. And that only happens if you wake up and realize that you don't want to keep following this path up this mountain and up the next mountain and up the next mountain forever until you die, or until you're 70 and you can't even enjoy fully the fruits of your labors. And so this is I think the great, I would say, the great temptation, or one of the great temptations of many of the paths that involve actual financial prosperity, is that more and more prosperity doesn't always mean that you're going to have a better and better life. And the point of getting this prosperity, the money and dollars in a bank account, pixels on your cell phone when you open up your online banking app, these are not an end in itself. Saying if there's one more zero on these pixels on my cell phone or on an Excel sheet that's my personal financial statement, that doesn't actually cash in for my direct experience in my life, in my enjoyment of this journey, unless I say that it should, unless I choose to prize something higher than just the next, just more and more and more and more and more of the same thing that we're not actually exchanging for real world flourishing and eudaimonia. And this is where we must have this wisdom, or these ultimate values, and we must say to ourselves what we prize more, because the world, everybody around us, is climbing up this mountain. By definition of us climbing up this mountain, we will be surrounded by people that are also climbing up this mountain. And the only way we got up to where we got on the mountain is by looking at the people who are further on the mountain, who gave us advice along the way, who mentored us along the way, who shaped the culture in which we are in. And we must say at some point that I see you are further along this mountain than I am, but this mountain of getting more money, of getting more status, of getting more resources is not the point of my life. The resources are a means to an end of my life. This is where we must say and have kind of courage to say that I am going to chart my own path. I am not going to just continue this forever. I'm going to get off the ride at some point when it makes sense. And that is where we can truly play the first person game, the single player game of our life, and actually look to have a great path for ourselves. But this only happens if we are able to completely break with all conformity, and to say this and to value this and to stand on our own 2 feet with our own values in this. Otherwise, the inertia of our subculture that we find ourselves in will keep us on this ride, keep us chasing this carrot on a wheel forever. How do you think about getting off the ride, or even the inner freedom equivalent of this?
You pointed towards actually the most important thing, in my opinion, is like the inner freedom, to be able to decide for what is meaningful to you, and to be able to act upon that and blaze your own trail with that, and not be steered in by opinions of others, by conditioning from society, by anything that anybody tells you, but by what you really feel and believe are your values. And with that, it's like I talk sometimes to an entrepreneur who was like a major importer of some kitchen device in Switzerland. And where do I talk to him? In the sauna, which he uses at the same time, which I sometimes use the sauna. He does the same things, but with a different car he drives to the sauna, you know? He's like a Lamborghini, and a gold chain and a Rolex, and some houses he now keeps in his retirement. And with that, he enjoys life in a similar way like I do, but with much more resources, much more freedom, whatever. But in the end, we are doing the same at the same time, at the same place. And then I talked to another entrepreneur who has started 2 or 3 companies and grew them to 40 people working with him. But then market shifted. There was an inflection point of some big change, and the revenue broke down. And what is he doing now? He's traveling but he started from zero again with 65. Gave the house away because of a divorce. The proceeds from his tradings went into gold he gave to his daughter. But he has some pension, which keeps him afloat, and now he's starting another thing and another thing. Like, this is life. It's taking risks, it's getting rewards, it's also losing some things. It's also the possibility of not getting the outcome you envision to get. It's a totally dynamic thing to live in. It's a wonderful thing, and you can do whatever you want, but also it goes hand in hand with the exposure to anything that can happen if you do what you want. It's about risk and reward. It's about accepting whatever happens, but it's also about getting back up on your feet, having the mindset to proceed, to do what you want, to do what you really want to do. And now the guy is traveling, the other guy is also traveling, but also in a sauna, on a different level. So what is meaningful to you is the question. And what I now learned from Ray Dalio a few years ago is that his meaning is meaningful relationships and meaningful work. And I frame it for me with similar words, like what I'm looking for and optimizing for in my life is meaningful relationships with loved ones, people I meet, being kind to others, but also applying myself in a meaningful way, with meaningful creativity, and trying to get the uniqueness which everybody has into the world. And that means to decide for yourself. That means be the architect of your own life. Make your own decisions, but also be okay with the consequences, with the potentialities which arise whenever you make a decision. Can go wrong, but also can go right. It can go very right. Be okay with whatever happens. And that reminds me of the book from Jiddu Krishnamurti, Total Freedom, where he states, and the secret for me is, I don't mind what happens.
This is beautiful. This is beautiful. And what you point to is that the inner freedom and the outer freedom, they may seem separate, or they may even seem like mutually exclusive, like we must focus on one or the other. But I do think that that is, on the big scheme of things, when we look at the real world and actually look at us as limited biological creatures, we find that they're actually so important to support each other. If we want to have great external freedom, it will be impossible unless we have the internal freedom to have courage to take risks and put ourselves out there, to endure isolation, to reject the conformity around us. This can only happen with a degree of internal freedom. And same with, if we want internal freedom, there's many ways in which a total lack of external freedom and just completely ignoring external freedom can get in the way and undermine our quest for internal freedom. Once again, not maybe in theory, maybe not in the most ideal of whatever. If we're superpower Buddhas in our mind, then maybe we can be in some knife fight in our daily life and just maintain total inner equanimity. And I've wished for that to be the case in my own life, when I was in just a miserable knife fight of external bondage. However, what I found is, even if I went into it with a high degree of flow and freedom internally, and wisdom and awareness, the external environment, if I'm forced to adopt a conflict-heavy stance, or being forced to play really toxic interpersonal zero-sum games, the internal freedom erodes in my mind, and at least most of the time, even if it doesn't have to, or if it can be cut through, or if it isn't that solid in the end. All of these things can also be true, but the 60% of the time, or the 80% of the time, it will have an effect on our degree of internal freedom if we have no external freedom. And one thing that I will mention too, as I called out earlier, is this is not a matter of, oh, it's blameworthy and judgment worthy to not currently be in a state of freedom. Far from the case. really the only way that we can attain certain forms of growth in this life, and really the only way that we can obtain, I would say, certain paths of freedom that are available to us is, ironically, by making a wholesale sacrifice of freedom for a season of our life. And this is what entrepreneurship is. If you start a business, this is something that you ultimately are a servant to for as long as you must be a servant to. You are a servant to your customers, you're a servant to your employees, you must show up on time, you must carry the load, you cannot complain, you cannot quit and get another job. This is the huge difference of, even if you're doing the exact same thing, having all your skin in the game is just an absolute shackle around your neck at times, and sometimes for long periods of time, and you have no ability to get off the ride. And it can be it can be totally compatible and values consistent to have freedom as your highest goal, but yet to subject yourself to a long season, or a subjectively at least long season of bondage for ends that do ultimately include your freedom. Ironically, these are sacrifices that we can make. We should never expect to, first of all, we should never expect to start off in the end zone of already being there. We should not blame ourselves for not already being there when we're on the path, because it's a long path, and this is one of the most difficult and arduous journeys that we could undertake in our lives. But nonetheless, this quest to have the ability to allocate our finite time here, to spend our finite existence in the way that leads to the greatest flourishing for ourselves and others, according to our values that we have inspected and that we truly feel aligned with from our hearts. This is one of the highest goals, because this is upstream of who we can be for our families, for our friends, for our relationships. This is upstream of how we can give our gifts to the world. If we have no freedom, we very well might have all this potential and all this desire to love others and to give to others and to bless others and to have a flourishing family and to do all these things. And we may never be in the position to, because we didn't undertake this grueling, difficult journey and groundwork to prize this highest value of freedom that can enable and open the doors to all of these other things. And so it's a very complicated journey, and not at all linear. And surprisingly, at least in my limited experience from one limited vantage point, it does seem to be that these internal and external states of freedom, although they can oftentimes get in the way of each other, or you focus on one at the expense of another in today, in this moment, nonetheless, actually paralleling these both and to prize both of these and to seek to grow in both of these at once, we find that without both of these, without this awareness as the baseline, the progress may be fragile, or there may be a ceiling that we bump into that we were not expecting, where yes, we got this external freedom, but yet we cannot seem to leave it, and we must seek the next thing, and we must seek the next thing, and now we're obsessed with status, and now we're getting caught up in zero-sum power games, and then we're 30 years later of suffering on this ride, and we never ultimately cashed in for the ultimate prize of being able to do what we want with our life. Any other closing thoughts from you, my friend, on the quest and the dual nature of it?
Yeah. I especially like that you pointed towards the story of risking so much to gain another 50% of a growing empire. Risking so much again and again and again is like the way an addict would go
Yes.
to get his next hit. And that's actually it as well. If you want real freedom, you need freedom from this pull, this addiction towards reacting in a pre-programmed and a preset way. You just want to increase, you just want to have more. Where is more going to be end? Where is more enough? And if you do it unconsciously, more will never be enough, because more keeps growing and growing and growing. So a question we could ask ourselves is, what is enough for me? What is actually the life I'm optimizing for? What is the outcomes I want to have for my family, for myself, for my friends, for the world surrounding me? And then apply yourself. And yeah, take the sacrifice and risk it and put your skin on the line. Have skin in the game, expose yourself. But always ask yourself, what am I optimizing for? What is enough for me? What is the criterion to really end the algorithm which I'm playing in? To not be the servant or the slave to the game, but to be the master. It's always like that. The ego is as well a good tool if you use it. But it's a terrible master if you get used by it. If you are used by it, and if it uses you. So it's always the key to be aware of where is enough for you. What is your optimization criterion? What is the point you define where you want to leave the game? What is the trade you are willing to make? What is your stop loss? What is your takeoff? There's some axioms on that as well, like always know in advance before you make the trade where is enough for you, and then take it. And don't be greedy. Don't be pulled in by emotions, because this is the easiest way to be pulled in much further. To be greedy, to be pulled in by emotions, and then risking more and more and more, to eventually lose it all again, to have to start from anew. And you pointed also towards that's an inner game. Yeah, it's an inner game to be played, and the freedom is already there. Last time you talked about the Zen story of the man looking for fire with his lamp with oil in his hand, lighting the way on his way to look for fire. But if he realized that he already had what he was looking for, he would have cooked his meal much sooner.
Yes.
And
Yes. And what you point to here, once again, when we're trying to pursue something that is just out of reach of our finite human chimp capabilities, we must lean on this meta skill of awareness, this greater capacity that can enable us and carry us and flow us to what would be beyond our potential, trying to manipulate and control the world just from our little ego control base. And one of the important ways that we must use awareness is to recognize the difference in what I say I value. For instance, me sitting here on this podcast saying that freedom is one of the highest goals to pursue in life and one of the most worthy ends to make great sacrifices and endure great things for. And then what my actions say that I value. And this is if I'm looking to win an argument and by doing so get entangled in a mess of conflict that I could have easily avoided. If I look to win every zero-sum game of tug of war and distract myself from abundance and the big picture. If I look to indulge addiction or control or greed or desire and amass and fixate my mind on these things, then my actions are betraying the fact that I'm not actually valuing what I'm saying that I value. And it is only awareness that can wake us up to this fact, because inevitably it will happen. Inevitably we will get tempted, we'll become blind, we will go astray. But this is the recalibration and the steering wheel of awareness or of sight of actually what our actions are saying and how we may wish to change course. And this is, because it is a long journey, because it is a complicated and difficult journey, it really we can't just start the car, step on the gas, and take our hands off the steering wheel and hope that the car will go the right direction the whole time. We must correct our course, adjust, and that can only happen by actually having awareness to see how and what ways our actions are not steering in alignment with our values, and then to bring ourselves back. And so this is my intention for the week, to bring awareness. Of course, there are some ways that I act that are completely aligned with what I am pursuing, my highest ends, and what I am here for. But tragically and inevitably, there will be many things that I do this week that will not be aligned with my highest values, that will not be aligned with my intention to manifest freedom in my life and to manifest openness and possibilities yeah, for myself and in the world. And so this is what I hope to see with a little more open eyes and to admit to myself and correct course when I drift astray. How about you? Any intentions for this week?
Beautiful intentions. And the same thing applies to it is also okay
Yes.
if you want to limit yourself and have less freedom in your world, but also less anxiety. But the limitations also enhance creativity. Sometimes it's also totally fine limiting yourself, committing yourself, not moving in a world which is made to be free in, but going into the structure you really enjoy, you really feel home at, you really grow in. And with that, my intention for this week is having the acceptance of my own failings, but also the intentions of taking the possibilities and the opportunities to grow. So, and to be free to decide for myself, to have the courage to deal with the uncertainty which I'm facing when I'm totally free. And then to not mind what happens.
Yes. Yes. Beautiful, man. I appreciate you sharing these. This is wonderful to reflect on, and definitely it just helps me remind myself what is the goal behind a lot of the everyday things that I do. This is a great North Star for me, as it is for you. So thanks for what you shared. I will be marinating on this today and looking forward to doing our best this week and accepting the ways that we fall short, but yet living with some intentions in mind. Thank you, my
Yeah,
friend.
bro. Let's do our
We'll talk to you on
best.
the
Thank
next
you
one.
very much. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.